Picture this. A cold moon hangs over the forests of Wallachia. The air is thick with the scent of pine and death. A rider approaches a fortress where impaled bodies sway gently in the wind, a grotesque forest of the dead. Their hollow eyes glimmer in torchlight as ravens circle above. At the center of it all stands a man in blood-red armor, his gaze unflinching. His name is Vlad, the Impaler, the real Dracula. Centuries before Bram Stoker's fictional vampire haunted the castles of Transylvania, a real man ruled those same lands with a hand of iron and a thirst for vengeance. Vlad III of Wallachia, remembered as Vlad Tepes, meaning the Impaler, was born in 1431 amid war, betrayal, and blood. His homeland lay trapped between two great powers, the Christian kingdoms of Europe to the west and the mighty Ottoman Empire to the east. From childhood, Vlad learned that mercy was weakness. He was taken hostage by the Ottomans, taught their customs, and forced to study the art of cruelty from both sides of the battlefield. When he finally returned home, it was not as a boy, but as a storm. His reign, from 1456 to 1462, became one of the most brutal in history, a campaign of terror so horrifying that even his enemies whispered his name with fear. To some, he was a national hero who defended his land. To others, a monster who drank the blood of his victims. And somewhere between those two truths, the legend of Dracula was born. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy dark history stories like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your feedback in the comments. It really helps us bring more forgotten tales like this to life. The story of Vlad the Impaler begins in a world drenched in fear and betrayal, where kingdoms rose and fell not by armies alone, but by cunning and blood. Imagine being born into a land where loyalty was a weapon and mercy a liability. Vlad's childhood was forged in that crucible of chaos. Born the second son of Vlad II Dracula, a knight of the Order of the Dragon, young Vlad inherited not only his father's name, but his enemies as well. The Order had sworn to defend Christendom against the advancing Ottomans, yet survival in Wallachia demanded compromise. When the Ottoman Sultan demanded hostages as a show of loyalty, Vlad's father sent his two sons, Vlad and his younger brother Radu, to live in the enemy's court. It was meant to ensure peace, but peace was an illusion. In the gilded halls of the Ottoman palace, Vlad learned the language of power and cruelty. He watched as disobedient soldiers were flayed alive, as traitors were strangled with silk cords, so their noble blood would not spill. He studied the art of pain, not out of fascination, but out of necessity. Every day he was reminded that he was both a guest and a prisoner. The Sultan's men whispered that Vlad's father had betrayed his oath to the empire. The boy's anger burned quietly, a cold fire that would one day consume nations. His brother Radu adapted easily to life in the Ottoman court, charming princes and courtiers alike. But Vlad's heart hardened. He vowed that one day he would return to his homeland, and the world would tremble at his name. That day came sooner than anyone expected. In 1447, Vlad's father and older brother were betrayed and murdered by Wallachian boyars, the local nobles, who sided with Hungary. Their bodies were left to rot in the open. When news reached Vlad, something inside him broke. The boy who had been humiliated, imprisoned, and powerless was gone. In his place rose a man who would use terror as both sword and shield. With Ottoman support, he seized the throne of Wallachia in 1456. But what followed was not merely a reign. It was a reckoning. Imagine walking through the streets of Târgoviște, the Wallachian capital. The air is thick with smoke and rot. Wooden stakes line the roadsides, each one crowned with the lifeless body of a nobleman. Their hands are bound, their mouths open in eternal screams. These were the Boyars, the same men who had murdered his family. Vlad invited them to a grand feast under the pretense of reconciliation. As they raised their cups, soldiers surrounded them. The young and strong were marched into the mountains and forced to build his new fortress at Poenari. The old and weak were impaled on stakes. Vlad's vengeance was complete, but it was only the beginning. To his people, he declared himself a ruler of justice, a man who would cleanse Wallachia of corruption and betrayal. He believed that order could be born only from fear. Thieves were executed without trial. Dishonest merchants were boiled alive. Even minor crimes met gruesome punishments. Yet amidst the terror, peace blossomed. Travelers spoke of how one could leave a gold coin in the streets of Wallachia and return to find it untouched. Crime vanished, but so did compassion. Vlad's rule became a paradox, brutal yet efficient, horrifying yet strangely admired. But here's the chilling part. His thirst for control extended beyond his borders. The Ottoman Empire demanded tribute, a sign of submission. Vlad refused. Instead, he led raids across the Danube, burning villages, killing soldiers, and leaving behind his signature warning, "Forests of the Impaled." Ottoman chroniclers wrote of fields where 20,000 corpses swayed on stakes, their blood dripping into the earth like rain. Even hardened warriors fled at the sight. One report claimed that when Sultan Mehmed II himself marched to confront Vlad, he stopped in horror before the Forest of the Impaled and turned back, saying, "How can one subdue a man who does this to his enemies and his own people?" Vlad's campaign of terror sent shockwaves through Europe. Western rulers hailed him as a Christian hero who defied the Turks, while others whispered that he was a demon in human form. Pamphlets printed in Germany and Italy exaggerated his atrocities, describing how he roasted children, mutilated women, and drank the blood of his victims. Whether those tales were truth or propaganda didn't matter. The myth was already forming, one that centuries later would give birth to the legend of Count Dracula. And yet, behind the monstrous stories, there was still a man, one shaped by fear, loss, and betrayal. Experts argue that Vlad's cruelty was not mindless. In a land torn by foreign invasion and civil treachery, he believed terror was the only language people understood. In his mind, every stake was a lesson, every death a warning. Imagine him standing atop his fortress, the wind howling through the valley below, watching the impaled bodies twist in the dusk. Was he satisfied or haunted? Perhaps even he no longer knew the difference. As the years passed, Vlad's reign of terror grew both infamous and unstable. His methods, while effective in maintaining order, created enemies not just outside his borders but within them. The nobles who had once feared him began to conspire in silence. The neighboring powers, Hungary, Transylvania, and the Ottoman Empire, all watched closely, waiting for the moment when the so-called Impaler would overstep his reach. And when that moment came, it would not be his enemies who struck first, but those he once considered allies. Imagine it. The year is 1462. Wallachia stands on edge, its fields soaked with blood from countless battles. Vlad has just led a daring night attack against the Ottoman army, slipping through the darkness with his soldiers disguised in enemy uniforms. Torches flicker, steel flashes, and chaos erupts. By dawn, thousands of Ottoman soldiers lie dead, their bodies impaled along the riverbanks. For a moment, victory seems certain. But as the sun rises, so too does the shadow of betrayal. His younger brother, Radu the Handsome, once a fellow hostage in the Ottoman court, now fights against him, commanding Ottoman forces loyal to the Sultan. The war that follows is not merely political, it is deeply personal. Brother against brother, loyalty against vengeance, faith against survival. Vlad's army, though fierce, begins to crumble. The Ottomans have greater numbers, more supplies, and the support of Wallachian nobles who have grown weary of their ruler's cruelty. Villages that once hailed Vlad as savior now turn him away. He retreats to the mountains, his enemies closing in. Imagine the exhaustion, the weight of every decision, every corpse, every stake. His empire of fear is collapsing under its own weight. The Impaler who once ruled with terror is now hunted by it. Yet even in defeat, Vlad remains unbroken. He burns his own villages to deny the Ottomans shelter, poisons wells, and ambushes supply caravans. He would rather see Wallachia in ashes than surrender it. But the end, as always, comes quietly. In 1462, Vlad is captured, not by the Turks, but by his supposed ally, the King of Hungary, Matthias Corvinus. He is accused of treason and imprisoned for nearly 12 years. During this time, stories of his cruelty spread like wildfire across Europe. The printing press, a new invention of the age, ensures that no tale is too monstrous to be believed. German pamphlets depict him dining among the impaled, laughing as blood drips from his victim's wounds into his cup. These accounts blend fact with fantasy, turning a brutal ruler into something more, something supernatural. To the terrified peasants and intrigued scholars of Europe, Vlad the Impaler becomes a symbol of unholy power, a man so cruel that death itself seems to serve him. But imagine being there, inside his cell, in the flickering light of a torch, staring at the walls that close in tighter with every passing year. Was he haunted by the screams of those he condemned? Or did he still believe he was the savior of his people, punished for doing what others dared not? Some say that during his captivity, Vlad found faith again, marrying a relative of his captor and even converting to Catholicism. But the truth remains blurred, lost between history and legend. In 1476, fate gave him one last chance. Released from captivity, Vlad returned to Wallachia to reclaim his throne. The land he once ruled with terror was now divided, scarred by years of war. Supporters rallied behind him once more, desperate for stability, even if it came drenched in blood. For a brief moment, the Impaler returned, his banner flying high, his vengeance renewed. But the years of exile had changed him. He was older, wearier, perhaps even haunted. The fire that once consumed him now flickered weakly against the darkness. His final battle came swift and brutal. Facing overwhelming odds, Vlad led his men against an Ottoman-backed army near Bucharest. The fighting was desperate, chaotic, steel against steel, shouts echoing through the winter air. No one knows the exact details of his death. Some say he was struck down by assassins among his own ranks. Others claim he was surrounded and killed in the melee, his head severed and sent to the Sultan as proof of victory. What remains undeniable is that his body was never found. Legends say he was buried at the Snagov Monastery, though no confirmed grave has ever been discovered. And yet, the story did not end there. Within decades, whispers began to circulate. Tales of a ruler who defied death, of a spirit that haunted the forests of Transylvania, of a figure who rose from the grave to drink the blood of the living. These rumors, born from centuries of fear and fascination, eventually inspired the Irish author Bram Stoker. In 1897, Stoker published Dracula, a novel that transformed the real Vlad into a creature of immortal darkness. The count who slept in a coffin, who feared sunlight, who fed on human blood, all drawn from the chilling echoes of the man history called the Impaler. Experts today argue that Vlad's legend reflects the psychology of his era, a time when cruelty and faith walked hand in hand, when rulers justified horror in the name of order. In modern terms, he might be seen as both a tyrant and a patriot, a man trapped by the violence that defined his world. His story reminds us that evil is not always born from malice. Sometimes it's forged by fear, survival, and the desperate need to control chaos. But here's the haunting truth. The same forests that once held the bodies of Vlad's enemies now hold his legend. Tourists still visit his castles, Poenari, Bran, and Targoviste, where shadows seem to whisper his name. Some say that on cold nights you can still feel his presence, watching, waiting. Perhaps not as a vampire, but as something far more human, a ghost of history, eternally bound to his own darkness. Centuries have passed since Vlad the Impaler ruled his blood-soaked land, yet his shadow still lingers, not just over Transylvania, but over the imagination of the world. His story has evolved from a chronicle of brutality into a legend of immortality, distorted by centuries of fear, folklore, and fascination. But beneath the myth of the vampire lies a far more unsettling truth, the tale of a man who used terror as a weapon and whose legacy challenges the very nature of evil itself. Imagine walking through the ruins of Poenari Castle today, the cold wind howling through broken stone, the echo of unseen footsteps following you through narrow halls. The air feels heavy, as if soaked in memory. This was Vlad's fortress, his seat of power and paranoia, perched high above the Argesh River. It was here that he watched his enemies burn, where he plotted his vengeance against traitors, and where he may have taken his last breath. Time has worn down the walls, but not the dread they carry. What makes Vlad's story so enduring is not the horror of his deeds alone, but the strange duality within them. To his enemies, he was a monster. To his people, a protector. In a region torn by invasions and betrayal, cruelty was seen as strength. Even centuries later, Romanians still debate whether Vlad was a sadistic tyrant or a patriotic ruler who defended his homeland against impossible odds. Historians point to letters written by foreign diplomats describing him as a man of great cunning and intelligence, one who ruled with the iron certainty that only fear could bring peace. But his punishments went beyond political necessity. There are accounts of entire villages wiped out, of children impaled beside their parents as warnings to others. And yet, trade flourished under his rule. Corruption nearly vanished. Roads became safe for travelers once more. It's this contradiction, justice through terror, that cements Vlad's place in history as both hero and horror. But here's where the story turns darker still. As Europe modernized, the memory of Vlad's cruelty refused to die. Artists, priests, and writers turned his life into moral cautionary tales. Woodcuts from the 15th century depict him dining among the impaled, calmly eating his meal while his victims writhed on stakes before him. These images, grotesque and mesmerizing, became early examples of propaganda, tools used to demonize him and to remind readers that tyranny breeds damnation. Yet these same depictions also fascinated audiences. People were drawn to him not in disgust, but in awe. The idea of a man who defied both God and death stirred something primal, a dark curiosity about the line between power and monstrosity. That fascination only deepened with the birth of Gothic literature. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Europe was obsessed with the macabre, ghosts, the undead, forbidden desire. Vlad's legend fit perfectly into that world. Bram Stoker, researching Eastern European folklore, stumbled upon the name Dracula in old texts. It means son of the dragon. From Dracul, Vlad's father's title as a member of the Order of the Dragon. Stoker took the name, the atmosphere, and the whispers of cruelty and transformed them into the mythic vampire we know today. But while Count Dracula hunted his victims in candlelit chambers, the real Vlad hunted something far more elusive: power, order, survival. In that sense, the fictional monster became a reflection of the historical man, both consumed by their hunger, both immortalized by fear. Imagine the irony: a ruler who impaled his enemies to be remembered as strong, is now remembered as undead. The very terror he wielded to maintain control became the foundation of a legend that turned him into something eternal. But perhaps that's fitting. For Vlad's true immortality lies not in the grave, but in the human mind. In the way we return to his story again and again, searching for meaning in the darkness. Was he born a monster or made into one by the cruelty of his time? That question still echoes today in every tale of power gone mad, every leader who believes fear is the only path to loyalty. Experts often draw parallels between Vlad's world and our own. They note that the same propaganda used to define him in the 15th century still thrives in modern politics, where fear is manipulated and villains are created by rumor as much as by deed. In that sense, the legend of the Impaler warns us not just about brutality, but about the stories we choose to believe. Because history, like fear, can be weaponized. The line between truth and myth is thin, and Vlad's life stands precisely on that line, forever blurring it. Today, tourists flock to Romania's Dracula Trail, visiting Bran Castle, often falsely promoted as his home, and buying trinkets shaped like bats and coffins. They walk through candlelit halls, not realizing that the real Vlad may never have set foot there. Yet the power of his legend is undeniable. For centuries, his story has survived wars, empires, and revolutions. In every retelling, the details change, but the essence remains. A man who became a myth, and a myth that became immortal. Imagine standing at his supposed burial site at Snagov Monastery. The lake is still, the water dark. Somewhere beneath the silt, perhaps, lies a body that may or may not be his. Or perhaps, as the stories suggest, he never truly died at all. But here's the haunting part. What if Vlad wasn't unique? What if his brutality was not an exception, but a mirror held up to humanity itself? Every age produces its own monsters, each justified by the morals of its time. In Vlad's world, terror was governance. In ours, it takes different forms: propaganda, power, manipulation. The faces change,